I never thought I'd see the day where I'd be saying this, but the final movie in Fox's X-Men series, The New Mutants, is finally here. This film was doomed from the start, being delayed multiple times and basically being sat on since 2017. It's been delayed 5 times before getting its final release, a release that I actually didn't see advertised anywhere at all. The last I heard, this film was taken off their release schedule, then the next thing I know, my local cinema was showing it this weekend. I haven't seen any posters, adverts on TV, nothing. It's just kind of been thrown out by Fox. It really feels like from beginning to end of making this movie, they had zero hope in it at all. But despite all of that, there was no way I was going to miss this movie, as I kind of knew it was going to be a huge train wreck. Even going past the fact that the film was delayed multiple times and Fox clearly had no hope in it, director Josh Boone came from a background of terrible romantic comedies. I found it very unlikely that he would be able to make this weird horror and superhero hybrid, and the final movie is about as disastrous as you would expect it to be. The film features a group of young mutants who are held in a secret facility where they learn to control their powers before they're moved somewhere else. One of the newest of these mutants has the power of making people's nightmares come true, which leads to the other mutants getting hurt and scared. There are some twists and turns from there, and they all end up having to fight to save themselves. On paper, I think the story is an interesting idea. In fact, I think the idea of making this young adult horror movie with superhero elements could have been something quite entertaining, at least not for the reasons it actually was. But this film is so unbelievably stupid, badly written, and tonally inconsistent that this was basically impossible to achieve. It was a film that was recut multiple times and had been planned to almost be completely reshot until everyone just kind of gave up on the project entirely. And because of that, you're left with this film that can't decide whether it wants to be this blockbuster horror movie in the style of It and its fantasy sequence, or just a young adult superhero movie. So you get this hybrid of the two which don't work together whatsoever. Some of the dream sequences I thought were actually kind of cool. I enjoyed the Smiley Man sequences, although I still have no clue why Marilyn Manson was brought in to play those voices, but most of them were pretty average. The best thing I can say about the horror elements are that although they follow a lot of horror tropes, there's not a single jump scare. The scares are much more textural and created by visuals and atmospheres, something I actually really appreciated. But these horror sequences are few and far between. The majority of this film is watching these teens do pretty generic young adult drama things like making fun of someone for being a virgin and making out in a swimming pool. What makes these scenes even worse is the writing is absolutely terrible. There are multiple lines of dialogue that made me cry with laughter. I was originally going to say a collection of these lines myself, but I thought instead of doing that, I would download a version of the film filmed by someone in the cinema and just use a collection of my favourite lines from that. But weirdly, this version of the film came with like extra bonus scenes where they're like advertising some weird casino or something. I don't really know why, but yeah, they didn't show that in my screening for some reason.
He's right, it's magic.
So am I.
What kind of Indian are you?
Hey, Yogi!
I was huge in 5th grade. You don't scare me. My dad told me about bitches like you.
And finally, my favourite quote in the film, a quote from The Wizard of Oz for no particular reason.
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
A line that literally makes no sense because the only one of those 3 that's actually on screen is a bear. Then that is just a handful of the golden lines that this film has to offer. Despite the film being filled with some pretty great actors, no one does a good job at all. For some strange reason, Maisie Williams, Anya Taylor-Joy and Charlie Heaton are all made to put on accents, none of which are very good at all. Anya Taylor-Joy is the only person in the film who seems to be kind of self-aware about the fact that her performance isn't very good and the film is even worse, and she just kind of seems to go all out, and it's really hilarious to watch. I understand that these characters were originally from Scotland, Russia and Kentucky, but couldn't they have hired someone from those places, or even someone who can do those accents actually well, or even take them to like an accent coach like a lot of actors do to nail accents like this. Or even just change their origins so they could use their original accents instead of these really bad fake ones. They already changed a black Puerto Rican character into a Latina Brazil woman. It makes literally no difference. Speaking of which, Alice Braga was also pretty terrible in this movie. She seems to go between overacting and not even trying at all, and it creates this performance that feels almost like two different people are playing the character. And to make matters even worse, the characters are really badly written. None of them are memorable or interesting, and by the end of the film I couldn't remember a single person's name. They all have very basic character traits. Rain comes from a religious background, however after being attacked by a priest is struggling to reconcile with her beliefs. She's also bi or pan or gay or sexually confused or something. They don't really explore that aspect of it. It's kind of glossed over in one scene, but we'll get to that later on as I go through some spoilers. Ilyana is an angsty Russian teenage girl who is better than everyone else because she has killed people and fucked a bunch of guys. Sam suffers from PTSD following accidentally murdering his dad and is sad about it. Danny exists, and Roberto is a virgin. None of the characters are interesting or likable, have any deep backstory or really anything deep about them at all. They all just kind of exist, and some of them barely even do that. Now we're going to get into spoilers, so spoiler warning in case anyone actually cares about this movie. So in this hospital there is one character running the place called Dr. Reyes. Dr. Reyes uses her force-filled power to stop people escaping, but she's the only person running the entire facility. In fact, she is the only person in the facility, not including the mutants, which makes literally no sense. How can one woman run this entire facility against people with murderous powers? All she can do is like make this bubble. She can't stay up 24/7 and spy on them. There's multiple scenes where she literally tries doing that and it makes no sense. She just like not need any sleep at all ever. And what happens when she goes to sleep? Can she use her mutant powers while she sleeps? And if so, how? Like surely when you're sleeping you're not focusing on something like that. And why does no one just wait till she's asleep and kill her so they can get out? And somehow she manages to overpower them all later on by using her force fields. One of the characters can literally teleport. Why doesn't she just teleport out the force field, go behind her and kill her? It makes no sense. There's a plot twist at the beginning of the third act where we find out Rey's employers are the Essex Corporation who we saw in Logan. Apparently once these mutants learn to control their powers, they're moved to the corporation's facility. But this makes no sense because that corporation are filled with young mutants who are born and bred in the facility, and once they're old enough they're used for their military operations. But they never brought in mutants of these mutants' ages to come into their facility. It's so dumb. And using the footage from Logan also technically places it in the timeline of that film. And if the film is set in the events of Logan, basically every other mutant is dead. There are no X-Men alive anymore. So the dialogue about them being possibly transferred to become an X-Men literally makes no sense. And I know this facility inside the universe has been around for years, but they specifically used the footage from Logan, which in itself makes no sense because the footage in that film was recorded using a secret camera by one of their employees, and the only person who ever sees that footage is Logan. It's a plot hole that I'm sure general audience members won't pick up on, but I highly doubt anyone who isn't already a fan of the X-Men movies is going to see this film. At one point in the film, Rain and Danny make out and take their close relationship to the next level. However, this scene is never built upon or anything. They never explore either character's sexuality. It's kind of just thrown in. It's such a pointless scene and feels really pandering. Just like Disney always do, they've thrown in this gay relationship in a way that takes up almost no screen time and serves no purpose to the plot, meaning that they can easily cut it out for Chinese audiences. It's such a scummy, pointless move, and it genuinely made me angry. I really hate that they keep fucking doing this in their films. It doesn't serve any purpose, and it just makes the film so much worse. Despite all these issues, I cannot say I had a bad time watching this film. There are a handful of bits I really liked, and everything else is so hilarious that I had a blast of a time watching it. I would not recommend watching this in the cinema, but if you watch this at home with your friends and a lot of alcohol, then then you're in for a great time. If I was to rate it on a pure enjoyment scale, I would give it a 2.5 out of 5, but if I'm completely critical and ignore the amount of times I laughed, I would give The New Mutants a 1 out of 5. This film is terrible. I've not seen the last couple X-Men movies, so I can't judge them, but this is one of the worst movies in the series.